Welcome to Lesson 2. In Lesson 1, we went through some basics for getting set up. We talked about the DJI authorized mobile devices and how to connect your mobile device to your controller. I also went through the procedure for downloading the GoApp software and updating the firmware. In this lesson, I'll be going into the details of the GoApp program. I hope that you find it to be beneficial, as I'll also be providing tips for what settings I recommend for your photos and videos. We're currently in camera view, and I want to take you through the various menus that we have here, as well as camera options, and talk about what these things mean and these icons here on the left as well. I'm going to start here with the Opti menu. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And we see that we come to the main controller settings. And the first option is home point settings. We don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time here because the home point will set automatically. But to set it manually, you can come in here and press on the aircraft icon. And it says set the current aircraft position as the home point. Now the aircraft should be on the ground if you're setting this manually. If you're setting it while it's in the air, the aircraft will return to the location of where it was being set while in the air. So again, this gets set automatically. So be listening for that message that says the home point has been updated. And then you know that the home point has been set. The reason this is important is for fail-safe purposes. So if you press return to home, or if for some reason the Phantom needs to go into a return to home situation, it will come back to its home point. If the home point was set while on the ground, then it will land. It'll come all the way to the ground. Otherwise, it'll just come to where the home point was set while in the air, and then you can still guide it the rest of the way down to the ground. So that's okay. Let's go ahead and press cancel here. Let's go back into Opti. The other option is with the man image here. Click on that. It says set the current position as the home point, and so this has to do with your mobile device. And so where your mobile device is, that is going to determine the home point. So again, I'm going to go ahead and click on cancel. All right, back to Opti menu one more time. So again, home point settings, it automatically gets set. Listen for that message that says home point has been updated and you're good to go. But you can set it manually. Next is multiple flight mode. Now, I highly recommend that the multiple flight mode be turned on. The default setting when you come in, it is not on. So let's go ahead and bring it back over and turn it on. Also in this area, it talks about the ASP switch on the back of the controller. P stands for positioning mode. In the positioning mode, we still have forward obstacle sensing. This is an option that is available in the positioning mode. We also have satellite and vision positioning, where GPS systems are enabled. In sport mode, under S, this is for maximum speed while maintaining satellite and vision positioning support, but the forward obstacle sensing systems is disabled. So it will run into obstacles, so be very careful of that. And then under attitude mode, the forward obstacle sensing is available just like in positioning mode. Satellite and vision positioning system is disabled. So that's different from the positioning. Because this is disabled, that means that GPS is not being used to stabilize the quadcopter. Only the barometer is used for altitude control. So it'll stay up in the air. It won't fall down if you let go of the sticks. But if you send the Phantom out directly ahead of you and you let go of the sticks, it'll keep on going. Or if you send it to the left, it'll just keep on going. Or if it's windy, it'll be influenced by the wind. Now, why have this mode? Because It's a very powerful mode for video. It can provide very smooth video, very soft, flowing, smooth video. You just need to understand how it works. And then in order to bring it back again, if you use the right stick forward to send it out, then you would use the right stick back to bring it back. You can't just simply let go of the sticks. It needs to come back. You could also switch modes. You could switch back to P positioning, and then the GPS will stop the phantom from flowing. And so keep that in mind. So let's go to the next feature of return to home altitude. The default altitude is 30 meters. And we can change that. And what's important is to consider what obstacles you may have in your area of where you're flying. Is there a building? Is there a tree that might be more than 30 meters? 30 meters is approximately 90 feet. Most trees are under 30 meters. This is going to work in most instances. But if there's an obstacle, a hill, a very tall tree, there are trees that are very, very tall, then your return to home altitude should be higher in that instance. Fortunately, with the new obstacle sensing system, if there's a return to home and there's an obstacle in front of it, it is programmed to go up above the obstacle or around the obstacle instead of flying directly into the obstacle. So that's a new feature, part of the Phantom 4. Next, let's go on down here to the flight restrictions, and we have beginner mode. Now, beginner mode is normally set to be on. That would be the default mode for people getting started. And what that means is you're limited to 30 meters altitude and 30 meters in distance. And that's very restrictive. Now, you can use that as, the first time you go out to fly, so it doesn't go flying off on you or something. But I think it's very restrictive, and so most people are going to turn that off. Go ahead and turn that off. So under maximum flight altitude, we're currently at 120 meters, and so that's going to keep us under 400 feet, which is the FAA altitude restriction. Enable maximum distance, if we were to press that as an option. That then allows us to determine, kind of like a fence, to determine how far are you willing to go before the Phantom stops, before it won't go any further. It gives you a message saying distance limit has been met. This can be a very helpful feature, especially if you're using attitude mode, or you get into a situation like I've had one time where all of a sudden I was using waypoints and I didn't realize that the system went into attitude mode and it started flying off on its own. Well, fortunately, I was paying attention and I could see that it was flying off. I switched over to the positioning mode and I had control again. But if we were to set the maximum flight distance, then the Phantom will stop. It won't go any further. So let's go ahead and let's add another 0. And so that will still give us plenty of distance, keeping it within sight and where it won't go flying off too far. Next, let's go to advanced settings. We'll just click on the arrow here. And here we have gain expo tuning. And so we're going to press that arrow. These give us options that we can make our own changes for throttling down, rudder right, rudder left, forward, that sort of thing. This particular one, the rudder right and rudder left, has more to do with yaw. For getting good smooth film, this is actually a good one to slow down. So you'll notice that if we go to sport, we're currently in normal. If we go here to sport, we'll notice that the line is absolutely straight, which indicates that the action would be just immediate. It's really meant to be, if you go to the left or to the right, it's going to respond absolutely immediately. And when you're in sport, you don't have a lot of time, you want it to respond immediately. Under normal, when we want to get good smooth video, it can be very helpful to slow this one down a bit. So I'm just going to drag with my finger here, and so you can just kind of drag it and move it a bit. And this will slow it down so that when you yaw, that the yaw won't be so jumpy. It won't be overly done. And forward right, we could slow that one down just a wee bit, just to make it all a little bit smoother. Because that's really our goal, is to provide settings for smooth video. That's really the goal here. All right, I'm going to press the arrow key, head back, and next we're going to go to sensitivity. Now these are set as I would expect them to be, your altitude, sensitivity, as far as flying up, braking, how fast do you want it to brake, yaw endpoint. I'm going to leave these alone here. Gain, I understand, is affected by outward circumstances of wind. We want to keep everything at 100. And sensors, let's go ahead and go over here to sensors, take a quick look. And here we can see the two IMUs that they're currently green. I don't need to calibrate my IMU, but just to show you what that looks like, I'm going to go ahead and press on that. Don't move the aircraft during the calibration. The process will take 5 to 10 minutes. Well, I'm not going to do that because my indicators were showing that my IMUs are doing just fine. But anyway, you would, in order to do your calibration, if you have a crash or something goes wrong, you would press start calibration. Let's go back here to the arrow. And then let's take a look at compass. I'm surprised I have any green whatsoever because obviously the Phantom is indoors here, and indoors it doesn't do real well. So the compass will need to get set before I fly. So let's go back now. That's our sensors. And then under other, we have radio controller signal lost. So what are the options here? Well, there's return to home. It could go into landing mode or hover mode. And I think the best option is if the signal is lost, I want it to return home. I don't want it to land, especially if it's over water. And I want it to just hover. I need it to come back. That's the point. The signal is lost. I need it to come back to where it will have a signal again. So I'm going to leave return to home. And then smart return home. This is important so that if the quadcopter gets into the area where let me go back here and close our window. Here you can see this is a bar that indicates how much battery life we have left. And this bubble, that if I go flying out to some distant destination, that this is the expectation that at this point I need to return home. This is the 30% low battery warning. This is the calculation for how much battery life is needed in order to come back safely. All right, so let's go back now to Opti. So that should give you a little bit of understanding for the smart return home. So with this turned on, when the battery reaches that level that's needed in order to bring the Phantom back safely, it will do that rather than leaving the Phantom out there stranded. All right, so next is turn on the arms LED lights. And so the arms, they provide the lights for direction. This is your forward direction, this is your back direction, and if there's things going wrong, it will also indicate blinking red lights and blinking yellow lights, various things that alert us to problems or the condition that the quadcopter is in. I'm going to leave that on, and I'm going to bring us back now to the main controller settings. And so we've talked about the maximum flight distance, and we are just in advanced settings. So just to let you know, these icons over here on the left are the same icons that are up at the top. instead of going directly to these icons here on the left, I want to close this menu and show you the icons up at the top. So this concludes our main control settings window, and so I'm going to go ahead and close this window now. One other thing I wanted to point out here is that this is a new feature here, this graph-like image. The reason this is here is because of the optical sensing system. It is recognizing that the Phantom is just a few feet away from this bookshelf. It's giving the warning that it's just 2 feet away. Another thing I just want to point out very quickly is that whenever you see things in red, that indicates danger. So if the lights on the quadcopter are blinking red, that usually means something bad is happening. So just kind of keep that in mind. If things are red, that's usually a signal that this is not good. So the next menu option here is the visual navigation system. So here we are, and we can turn it on or have it off. This is going to activate the cameras in the front. It says the maximum speed using optical sensing is 22 miles per hour. And so that's about the rate of speed in which the Phantom travels when the visual navigation system is turned on. And then under Tap Fly, you can allow horizontal obstacle avoidance. If activated, the aircraft will automatically fly around detected obstacles. Well, that's a good thing, unless it's a tree. And if there's a small branch and it doesn't recognize the branch, it could fly around but still get caught in the branch. That would be a concern. Or if there's something that is small that it just doesn't see. For example, if there's wires. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. So instead of going around the obstacle, what it will do is it'll hover. And then it'll allow you to control it to go around the obstacle. And that would be a safer option. Enable backward flying. So if activated, the aircraft will automatically fly backwards if the subject being tracked is moving towards it. So this would be great for having fun, like with a dog, or if you're running after it, maybe with children or something, and it's just going to fly backwards. But the danger is that if it flew back so far that it ran into something, but again, at this point under active track, you should have control over it, but it just is another feature that you would have to be careful with. So I'm going to leave it off. So we could go to the next option here, but I'm going to close the menu. And this takes us to Safe to Fly. Under aircraft status, we are currently under OPTI. OPTI stands for optical. So it allows us to fly indoors. I'm currently indoors. There's not enough satellites to provide a GPS signal. The IMU is normal. This is where you would come to calibrate the compass. So you click on Calibrate, and you say yes, and then it gives us this little image for what to do. So you pick it up and you turn it around 360 degrees, and then you flip it down. And I'm going to demonstrate this in lesson 3, so you'll see exactly what to do for how to calibrate the compass. Go ahead and cancel that and take me back into Safe to Fly. Alright, so my radio channel quality is not good because I'm indoors and there's all kinds of metal activity around here. Strong interference detected. Alright, let's scroll up. My flight mode is OPTI. My radio controller mode is mode 2. Let's take a look at that. So these are the various modes that are possible. Mode 1 and mode 2, and you can set up your own modes. The standard mode is mode 2, where the left stick gives you elevation and yaw. The right stick gives you movement forward, backward, left, and right. Yaw, this one over here, turning to the left, turning to the right, whereas when you push the right stick to the left, it goes to the left. That is when the aircraft is facing direct opposite of you. So this is mode 2. It is the default mode, and it's the mode that I recommend. So let's go ahead and click on the arrow here. Alright, so that's the radio controller mode. aircraft battery, temperature, and remote control battery is at 100%. That's good. Remaining capacity. I can also format my card here. And so this gives us how much room is left on the card. That concludes the aircraft status. Let's go ahead and close that. And so now we're back here, and we're going to take a look at the radio controller here. So under radio controller, there's the gimbal wheel speed. Let's take a look at that. It's currently set up to 100%. So when I roll it down, it goes down pretty fast. Because we're primarily concerned about video quality, we can slow this down. Now when I roll it down, it's a little slower. And it should be a little more gentle. So hopefully that will work well. So let's go ahead and exit out of here. And next we have RC calibration. Now with the RC calibration, we can only do this with the aircraft turned off. Let's double check to make sure I'm correct. RC cannot be calibrated when it is connected to the aircraft. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to turn off the aircraft. I now have the aircraft turned off. I'm next going to click on the button here. This is the radio controller calibration. This is for the sticks. And so I can click on calibrate here. And then it says, please move the stick to the center position and tap the start button. Well, it's already in the center position. I don't know why they continue to say that with each version of the Phantom. Anyway, so let's press the start button, and gives us a warning, move on. And so now what I'm going to do is press the sticks left and right as far as they will go. And the key thing that I want you to know here is that notice that finish is still grayed out because it's waiting for me to calibrate the wheel as well. So I'm going to turn the wheel each direction, and now the finish button is lit up, and so I'm done. Yeah, so that's it. The radio controller is calibrated. So that's a good thing to do. Go ahead and go back. So you can see the Phantom 4 is now back up and running. So let's go ahead and go to stick mode. And we've already seen this. This is the various modes. Mode 2 is the default mode, where the right stick is the stick that's used to go forward and back, left and right. The left stick is used for yaw, which means turning left and right, and elevation and de-elevation. So as you go forward with the left stick, you'll elevate, go up into the air, and back is to come back down. All right, so there are other modes. You can do mode 1 or mode 3 or create your own custom mode. I'm going to go ahead and click on the arrow here, which takes us back. Now we have the button customization, and this is the buttons that's underneath the controller. So it's C1 and C2. C1 is currently set to camera forward and down, and if I click on this, if I press that, it shows that there are some other options here. Advanced camera settings, gimbal follow, and FPV mode. This gimbal follow and FPV mode, I pretty much just want to keep it on gimbal follow, because if you've ever seen this, FPV it's this first person view is the idea, and so as you're turning, it's just much more jumpy and jittery. So for video purposes, smooth video, you're going to want the gimbal follow. Toggle map and live view, and you know what that is. So live view would be the same as camera view, and that's very easy to switch, so I'm not concerned about that. Battery information. Now this one would be very helpful. So anyway, I'm going to leave this one alone at camera forward and down. And so camera forward is, the camera is going to be sticking straight out, and then the camera down is, so instead of gradually going down, it's it's going to pop it down very quickly. Let's go ahead and accept that. And then the other option now here is toggle map and live view. I'm going to change that to advanced camera settings. So that'll be on my left side is the C2 advanced camera settings. If your remote controller for some reason is not linked to the Phantom, this is where you would go to link the remote controller. You'd click on this, and then are you sure you want to link there? And you'd say okay, and I'm not going to do that, because what it does next is it gives you a whole minute to then press the button. You turn the Phantom, and there's a small hole where you press that button while this minute is going on, and then the remote controller and the Phantom are linked. Let's go ahead and click on cancel. And so this concludes the remote controller settings. And again, I'm going to go back. So let's hit the, and so, all right, so we've just concluded the remote controller settings. So now let's go into the HD setting here. So this is image transmission settings, and we're currently at auto, and that's what I'm going to recommend, is that you just stay on auto for 90% of your, at least for 90% of you out there, should be just using auto and let the system set up which channel is the best channel. Currently, you can see our current channel is 19. Green is the channels that are stable, and red is unstable. But you can see that just as watching it here, they change from time to time. Anyway, let's go into custom here. Let's suppose that you were wanting to fly out a long distance. You wanted to really test the distance and get out there. Well, understanding this area would be very helpful. We're currently set up at 6 megabytes per second. The higher this goes, the better the quality of the image, but it requires much more data going from the aircraft back to the controller. And so the likelihood that the transmission is going to get dropped out is greater by having it all the way to the top. Whereas on the other end, the quality decreases radically, but the likelihood of keeping some sort of a connection is much higher. So somewhere in the middle here at 6 megabytes per second is very good. Notice here it says 1.24 miles. Let's see what, if I go all the way down, now it says closer to 2 miles for transmission quality. And some people put on antennas for extending the image for longer distances. So let's go back to 6 megabytes per second. If you're going to manually choose a channel, you'd want to choose a green channel. Like right now, maybe 15 looks good, 15 or 16. 15 looks better. Because generally you want the channel to be short and you want it to be green. One of the problems that I foresee is that if I do choose custom, that the next time I go out to fly, it's still going to be on custom and it's still going to be on this other channel. And that's the reason I think it's kind of dangerous to use a custom channel. I think it's better to stay on auto so that you don't have to remember, oh yeah, what's the best, checking to see what is the exact best channel to be on. So I'm going to go back to auto and let the system determine what is the best channel. When we get outside, I suspect that these channels are more stable than what they are showing right now inside the house. All right, so we're done here as far as custom controls. Now let's go into the battery, and here it shows how much battery life we have, how full each of these cells are. It indicates, here it indicates my voltage and how many times it's been charged. You can see this is a brand new quadcopter. I haven't really charged it much. Here's the critical battery warning. It's at 10%. So that can be changed. You know, you can move that to 12% or something else. And then low battery warning is currently at 30%. The flight time is indicated here. Let's go to advanced settings. show voltage on the main screen. This is something I strongly recommend, especially in wintertime, that if your voltage goes into the red, you can be more careful about how you're managing the aircraft, and then also it indicates to you you need to return the aircraft back to you as soon as possible, because red is bad. Whenever you see red, something bad is happening. Let's go ahead and turn this on. Time to discharge is 10 days, and so that's the default, but I'm going to recommend that we change this to, something more like 2 days or every day, because it's just going to start discharging after a couple of days now. DJI always recommends that anytime you go out, that you charge up the batteries. So if the battery has started to discharge after a couple of days, then that's good. Then it's going to have some room to bring in new power. So anytime you go out there, you should be first charging up your batteries before going out to fly. So I'm going to change that to 2 days. And then here's my history, of which I have none. And so it would give some history about the batteries. All right, well, let's click on the arrow here to head back. And we're done here with the aircraft battery. We're still in advanced. So now here's the regular aircraft battery. Total capacity, remaining power, battery life. So it's brand new battery, so I've got full life yet. We're done with the battery. Let's move on to general settings. So here's our general settings menu. And so under general settings, our first item is units of measure. And the default unit of measure is metric. I'm in the US and I like imperial, so I'm going to move it over to imperial. Even though I find that not everything gets changed over to imperial in the GoApp, it's still metric. Well, let's move to YouTube live streaming. That is an option if you want to. It would update and provide all this information here for walking you through how to live stream. Go ahead and click next. Okay, so then here we are. YouTube live streaming, basic mode. Use basic mode to easily create a live stream from your aircraft, or custom mode. I'm going to cancel this at this time. And that concludes the main menus here at the top. So before we get into the menu, let's take a look at these settings here. We can see these are our current settings for the camera. So we have an ISO of 200. Our shutter speed is at 100 frames per second at a f-stop of 2.8. Our exposure value is minus 2.3. f2.8 is the aperture, and it will remain at f2.8. There is no changing the aperture in the DJI Phantom, at least not yet. So let's head over here to menu, and we have 3 different options. We have photo, video, and other options here. So under photo, let's go here under photo. So this is a single shot, and then HDR shot. That's where DJI will take and mix some shots together. HDR with the regular DSLR camera will take 3 or 5 shots and then allow you to mix those shots together into a high dynamic range image. Well, DJI does it for you. I don't know how many images it takes exactly, but actually it's the same file size as the single shot, but it looks different. Once you take it, it looks different than the single shot. So that's an option. And then multiple is an option where you can determine how many shots you would like to take, such as 3 or 5 or 7. And then auto exposure bracket will take 3 to 5 shots. This is very important because when it takes these 3 images, it will change the ISO and shutter speed in order to change the exposure. So the first image will be one exposure, and then the middle image, and then the third image will be a different, maybe a darker exposure. Same thing with 5, well, you only have more images. So if I was to try to get a really high-end image of, say, a building or a mountain or a scene of some sort, this is the option I would choose. This is what I would make use of. I would take these images then into Photoshop and combine them into a beautiful HDR image, only it wouldn't be automated. It would be, I would be able to make use of my own creativity and bring out the aspects of the images that I think really look good. So if you do have Photoshop or maybe Photo Elements, Adobe Photo Elements would be a good option for you. Consider using the auto exposure bracketing as an option. And then there's the time shots. So you can do time-lapse photography at 5 seconds, 7 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Glad to see we're down here to 5 seconds now. And so just able to keep taking those shots and really take some very interesting time-lapse photography. All right, so that is all we have for the photo. Let's head on back and then go into image size. So here's our image size. We have two different options, the 4:3. This is the aspect ratio, what they call aspect ratio versus 16:9. The new TVs these days are 16:9. And so that's what I would choose, is 16:9 sort of a aspect ratio. But really when you're talking about photography, I mean, it's not exactly the same, because you're also talking about image size. So this one is probably more like a 5:7 type of image, and this would be a standard image, a 4:6 crop. All right, well, let's head back. So now we have image format, and so let's take a look at, okay, so we have options here for RAW, JPEG, and JPEG plus RAW. In this case, it would do both. RAW provides us with more information. When I shoot, I like to shoot in RAW. I have Photoshop, I have Lightroom, and so in Lightroom, I'm able to then make use of these images where it has more information, and I can change, like if there's problems with exposure, it gives me more flexibility to make changes with the exposure. JPEG is nice in that you can take more pictures and the pictures get taken faster. When you're using RAW, it just takes longer for the camera to process it, and you'll notice that when you're taking the picture, it can just take a little bit of time. So it would be even worse with JPEG plus RAW. I like to shoot in RAW. If you don't have Photoshop or you don't have Lightroom, actually another thing I really would like to recommend is Adobe Photo Elements. It's a low-cost program that I believe would allow you to edit RAW as well as JPEG. All right, let's head on out of here. And let's go to white balance. White balance is important mostly for regular DSLR, but for this type of setting, when you're out flying, well, yeah, you have sunny days and cloudy days. I would recommend that you let the DJI camera take care of white balance. White balance is, it kind of adjusts the color of how everything looks. And so let me give you an example here. So right now we're at auto, and if we go down here to notice the color change in the background here when I click on sunny. I'm not sure if I noticed that. Now let's go to cloudy. Is it getting any different? Incandescent? Oh, now we can definitely see a difference. Now it's much more blue. And then fluorescent is back to being warm again. And then let's check out custom. And with custom, we're able to drag the slider over. So if you know your K values, incandescent is going to be like 3400, somewhere in there. That would be like an indoor light bulb, the old standard indoor light bulb. And then daylight is going to be like 5600. So here I am at 68, and so that still looks fairly natural. If I go all the way to the top here, now it looks kind of green. That doesn't look so good. So gives you a great amount of flexibility here for changing the color. And then we can also go all the way down. So if it's really very dark out, you might want to use 2000K. But I would recommend, my recommendation is that you stay with auto. Let's go back to auto and then hit the back arrow. but I think it's important for you to understand white balance. So we just went through that process. So now let's go to style. These symbols represent sharpness, contrast, and saturation. And then here you have different settings. So our current setting is standard landscape. So for landscape photography, you're up one on sharpness and up one on contrast. And then for softness, you're down on sharpness, and that's it. And then for custom, now personally, if I was to do a custom, if I was to create my own style, I think I would really boost these things up. So to do each one, you just click on it. So here's the first one here under sharpness for landscape. I would want that to be up, just like landscape is here. Let's go ahead and boost it up another one. And for contrast, I would probably boost that one up one. And for saturation, hey, I like a lot of saturation, so I'll make that a 2. And this would be my style. Would be for outdoor video. I think that would look good, where you've got lots of sharpness, a little bit more contrast, and lots of saturation. So anyway, you can play around with these. So let's go ahead and done here with style. And next we have color. So currently we set to none. Now let's watch and see again. Watch the background. So it's kind of like imposing a color. It's kind of a specialized look that color offers as an option. So we go to D-Log. So you can see it's a little bit lighter, not as saturated. And then we go D-Sen-like, more saturated. Now we're back to none. Let's go to art. You can see down here, much less saturation. And then black and white, no saturation. And then in contrast, vivid. So now it's really yellowish. And so it's high saturation. And let's go to beach. You can see now it's really kind of orangish. That might be kind of fun to play with if you're actually at a beach, is to go ahead and try a look or some of these different looks to some of your video. Now you can always do that sort of thing in post as well. So by changing the look of the film prior to actually processing it, well, that's a little bit dangerous, but it can be kind of fun. You know, hey, go ahead and try it. Video is digital and digital is cheap. And that concludes our photography section here. So I hope I'm giving you some insight into what I'm recommending here. I notice under photo, I've got the time lapse is set. So I'm going to go back to my single shot. And so we have to pay attention to what we have turned on. And so I'm going to go ahead and head back out of here. Now let's go over to video. And these menus are very similar to what we just learned in photo. So this should go by pretty quickly. Under video, we have different options for size. If you choose that the largest size, the frames per second is lower. But I strongly recommend that you have as high a frame rate as possible. As I would be more inclined to go with the 4K, so this is 4K in 30 frames per second, rather than in with this larger frame size in 24 frames per second. Let's go ahead and choose 30 frames per second. Now if we move on down here, some other options is 2.7K. And what does that give us for frame? Well, again, you have 24 frames per second or 30 frames. So that's not really giving us anything to be excited about. So let's move on down here to the 1080p. Now with 1080p, oh, look at this. This is the exciting stuff right here, right here. So now we can shoot at 120 frames per second. This is very important. One of the things that I want you to understand, so ideally you want your shutter speed to be no more than double the frame rate. So if your frame rate is 120, then your shutter speed would be 240. And if your frame rate is 60, your shutter speed should be 120. Let's take a look down here at 720p. And under 720p, we have options only up to 60 frames per second. So that's interesting. So they've really maximized for the 1080p, which is the standard video format. And so I would recommend definitely trying this 120 frames per second and see how that works out for your video, how smooth your video is. And just because you can shoot in 4K doesn't mean that you should shoot in 4K. If you are going to shoot in 4K, I'd recommend 30 frames per second. You want your frame rate to be as high as possible, because when you're flying, you're moving. Generally speaking, you're moving quickly. And so it has a lot of material in order to grasp and catch and captivate. That's why the 120 frames per second is so important. Also, with 120 frames per second, you can utilize slow motion. And so that'll be interesting to work with. So I look forward to that. So utilize the highest frames per second possible for your frame rate. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and go on down here to 1080p with 120 frames per second, because that's what I want to shoot in next. I want to really take a look at that and see how that's going to work out. So let's head on out of here and take a look at video format. Under video format, we have two options of MOV and MP4. I understand that MOV is for Apple, for those who have Apple devices, but in both cases they are compressed formats, so I don't know that one format is really a huge advantage over the other. Next we have NTSC versus PAL. And so if you're in the United States, you're going to use NTSC, and if you're in UK or other places around the world, you'll be using PAL. Hopefully you know what the video format is in your area. So I want the NTSC for white balance. Again, for my white balance, I want to keep that at auto. And so we've already gone over this with the photo. You can notice that it changes, white balance changes the color. Here's incandescent, makes it really blue. Here's fluorescent, and custom, how you can move the slider. All right, so I'm going to go back to auto. I highly recommend just using auto for your white balance. If you had a digital SLR, that would be different. I often use custom for my digital photography, or sunny, cloudy sometimes. But for this kind of work, for just going out and flying, I would use auto. All right. So we just talked about white balance. Now let's go into style. And again, we've already taken a look at this. So again, we have sharpness, contrast, and saturation. In fact, this is a style that I had already set up. Let's go back to standard here. And then OK. That's style. Now let's go to color. Again, all of these are the same. Just as we saw under photo, you have the D-log. It's going to change, it just kind of changes the look. Adds color to the film in a sense. There's none. Here's less saturation. Here's no saturation. Here's vivid. There's lots of saturation. And then beach actually just changes. It makes it more orangish actually. So I'm going to change this back to none. And so generally speaking, I would recommend that you choose none for color. And then if you're going to add a look, you do that in post so that you have control over it, and so that you can change it more readily to whatever you want, even black and white. All right, well, let's go into the wrench and see what options we have here. The histogram is very important. This will give us information. Here's our histogram. I need to bring it down. So let's see if I can help you understand this. So when the peaks are on the left, that means that we're seeing a lot of darkness. And when the peaks are way over on the right, that means that we're seeing maybe overexposure. Over here, it's like too dark. So what you really want is peaks in the middle. And so if I was to change the exposure, watch and see what's happening here. As I'm changing the exposure with the wheel, my exposure valuation is changing. Notice I'm getting more, the image is much brighter and everything is evening out. Isn't that interesting? So when you're outside and it's really sunny and you're trying to look at your screen and figure out just how much light you should have, use your histogram, because this, your screen is often, especially on a sunny day, it's very hard to tell. But your histogram, if your histogram is showing this type of pattern, you know you're going to be in good shape. But if it's like this, guess what? Your whites are all blown out. You get no detail. And if it's the other direction, and it's really dark, then guess what? It's too dark, and that's going to destroy your image. How dark can I make it? So hopefully that makes sense to you. And so you want your histogram, you want your peaks to be right there, kind of in the middle. Whoops, I went too far. You don't want to be blown out like I am now. I want to be somewhere in the middle there, and that is a great tool. All right, next is video caption. So with video caption turned on, when you take a look at your video, you'll see that your telemetry data, you'll have an option to include your telemetry data in your video in kind of a caption type format. So that could be interesting, as to, you have the choice as to whether to include it or not. But it gives you that telemetry data. So I'm going to leave that on. Overexposure warning is also helpful, but it's kind of a pain, actually. So here's overexposure. You can see it's kind of those dancing ants or lines or what have you. And so it's kind of telling me, well, here's my histogram. My histogram looks pretty good, but this is indicating that I'm overexposed. So, well, so it's helpful in that regard, but it looks bad. I mean, I don't really like to look at it when I'm out flying. So I'm going to turn it off. And it's just one of those things that you'll have to play with to see if you want to use or not. On those sunny days, and it's really hard to see the screen, it can be easy to have the whites in the image be overexposed. So maybe just turning that on, maybe that would just kind of give me a little warning that really I should maybe have my histogram be a little bit darker so that my whites are not so overexposed. So that's it's a good teaching tool. All right, now here we have 3D noise reduction. Noise is not something we want in our image. Noise happens like with too much ISO. It just makes your image more grainy, and so we want to reduce the grain. We want the image to be nice and smooth and look really sharp. So anything that will reduce the noise, I'm in favor of. Let's take a look at the grid now. So we have none, and so we're currently set up with none. Here's grid lines. Maybe you've seen that on some of these YouTube videos. And so this can be helpful for identifying your rule of thirds. You know, if your main subject is right here or over here. When you're flying, I really wouldn't worry about that sort of thing much. Here's another option for grid plus diagonals. Some people may have use for this. I don't. It does give a center point, which can be helpful. I do like the center point. If I was going to use one of these, this is the one I would use. It identifies my center point and helps me remember what's actually right here in the center. But I don't use it. I'll probably just go back to none. All right, let's head out of here. And now we're at anti-flicker. With anti-flicker, this has to do with outdoor lighting. And it also has to do with whether you're in the United States or Europe. And so if you're flying near outdoor lights, then you'll want to play with these different options. I would recommend just auto and let the system take care of it. Now you can try these things. It can possibly affect the look, especially as evening time comes, but especially under lights, like incandescent lights or fluorescent lights, these different options under one option or the other may work better. All right, so next, now do you see this little, so if I click here on my screen, notice that this is my exposure. And so notice the exposure just went up. So if I go here, and now my exposure goes way down again. I can also turn it off. I can just click on the X and that turns it off. So that's kind of a manual, automatic exposure all in one. Let's go back here to the menu. I'm not quite done yet. Just wanted to get rid of that. So I'm still here under the wrench. I'm going to go here to the bottom, and I was at anti-flicker, just finished that. File index mode. So this is important. We can reset, and then we can go continuous. Reset is each time you go out to fly, it will reset the numbers and restart over again at 0 or 1. Well, I don't want that. That would make my files all the same each time I go out, and I want to copy my files over my computer, and my file names are all the same. So I would prefer continuous. So I'll click on continuous here. The numbers will just continue to get higher and higher each time I fly. And that's what I would prefer. Okay, so next we have reset settings. Are you sure you want to reset the camera settings? And I'm going to say no, cancel. I don't want to do that because I've already made some changes. I don't want to go all the way back to the beginning again. Then I can also format my SD card. Are you sure you want to format the SD card? Well, in this case, I really don't care because I don't have anything on it. So I'm just going to go ahead and say yes. And it formats the card very, very quickly. If you have stuff on your card, this is a fast way to format your card. All right, so we've just completed the camera, the video, and the extra options under the wrench. Let's go back to menu. And what this bubble does, you can see over here, this is camera, so we're currently set to camera. So if I click on this guy here, that will take a picture. Notice it took a little bit of time because I'm on RAW. And then if I drag the bubble over, now I'm under video. And so notice that it's no longer white, now it's red. And so if I click on the red, now it's starting to count down and we're taking video. So anyway, so now I got some video, and so I'm going to stop that. And we can play back the video, or we can play back the picture that I took. So here's the video that I just took. Not very exciting. So I'm going to hit the back button. And hit the back button again. This is the playback button for playing back videos and images that you take. Now this is an area that I want to point out. It's very important, and that has to do with the tilt wheel. So notice where the blue dot is. This indicates the level of the camera. So if I go up, notice it's okay. This is going up as high as it can. Man, it's really going up there. And then down again. So right here at the red line, this is going to be at that 90-degree mark where it's sticking, where the camera is nice and straight. And then all the way down, you can see the floor here. The benefit of this is when you're outside and it's very sunny and the screen is hard to see, you'll often be able to see this area here with the bubble. And you'll be able to tell where the camera is, whether it's up or whether it's down or how fast you're going. So this is a very helpful tool, and I just want you to understand that it's there. Make sure that you use it. Let's go on down here to advanced camera controls. And so we're currently under auto, and we have an option for manual. So under auto, one of the things I can do is I can use the right wheel, the wheel on the right-hand side, and as I turn that, notice that it's making exposure changes for me. Very, very helpful. It's very powerful. This is called exposure value, so it's giving me the exposure value. This is something I can actually click on manually here. So if I want the exposure value, so even though I'm not in manual, this is one of the things I can change manually, is the exposure value. which is kind of interesting. And then when you go to manual, slide this over to manual, now you can change the ISO. You can personally indicate whether you want your ISO to be up or not, and your shutter speed, what your shutter speed should be. And so for me, I want my shutter speed to be at 240. And so, well, I'm currently indoors, but if I was outdoors on a sunny day, well, I want my ISO to be as low as possible. And so in order to get this combination, I need to have an ND filter on the camera. And so this is where you need to go to Amazon or B&H or Adorama or whoever you like to use and get some good ND filters. Now, I have a set, and so there's ND4 and there's ND8, and so the higher the number, the darker. And so once you put the filter on there and you bring your ISO down, you want your ISO, you don't want ISO in the daytime because ISO adds light. So as we bring ISO up, notice it's making it lighter. So in the daytime, when the sun is out, you don't want a lot of ISO. In fact, ISO, the other negative of ISO is that it makes it noisy. So generally you want to reduce your ISO. And shutter speed, the reason you want to keep your shutter speed at twice the frame rate is that this has to do with that jello effect. So oftentimes what happens, because we can't change the aperture, so what's the one thing we can change on a sunny day? Well, you can change the shutter speed. And so typically what happens, we bump up the shutter speed to some radical amount where it's really, really high, and then you get this jello effect where it's really jittery and weird. The grass is weird and does goofy things, and it's just not smooth, and it doesn't look flowing. It doesn't look sharp. And so let's go into the menu here and go into video, and let's change our video to 4K, and we want 30 frames per second. So let's suppose this is what you're choosing, and you go here to menu. So now we're back to menu, and I'm shooting 4K, and I go down here and I'm in manual, and under manual, remember it's 30 frames per second. So now I can go all the way down to 60. My shutter speed is at 60 frames per second. So my frame rate is 30 and my shutter speed is 60. And that's what I want when I'm shooting 4K. In order for the shutter speed to be at 60, I would have the ISO at 100, and I would put on an ND filter, probably an ND8 if it's a really sunny day, to get it down as low as I can, as low as possible to this ideal. So if it's not exactly at the ideal, don't worry about it. But we want it as low as possible. And you want your ISO to be low as possible. You don't want to add light, you want to take away light on a really bright sunny day. So now I'm done here with my manual controls. So I hope that you found this to be helpful for the camera options. Next we'll be taking a look at telemetry down here. So I'd like to go ahead and take a look at the telemetry data over here in the left lower quadrant. First we have the radar. Radar with the little plane here indicates the direction of the quadcopter. Next here we have height or altitude, how high it is off the ground. Here's distance away from where we're located. Here's the vertical speed and horizontal speed. This one is a little trickier. This one indicates the altitude off of the ground. It sort of depends on which icon is listed here. The other option is the distance that the aircraft is from the home point. And so if you see it's a little man, it's showing the distance that the aircraft is from the home point. Anything under 30 feet will show this icon, and then beyond that it'll show the distance to the home point. Next, over here on our left, go ahead and click on that. And so the intelligent flight mode terms, I'm going to go ahead and agree. And so this is where we have our options for tap fly, active track, our normal mode, and then the intelligent navigation options. Go ahead and click on Tap Fly. It starts off by giving us a beginner tutorial. The following tutorial will help you learn about new features. Practice in an open area. And so we can click on Start. Adjust flight altitude, take off, fly above, so you have to be above 3 meters, which is about 9 feet. And my current altitude is 0 meters. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm just going to exit at this time and go back. So that is Tap Fly. Let's go ahead, go into Active Track. And again, I have a beginner tutorial. I'm going to click on Start. And adjust flight altitude, take off above 3 meters. So since I'm not flying, I can't really go any further. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit Exit. Let's try one more. Well, here's normal. Let's look at intelligent. So here we have point of interest, which allows you to start off with a beginning point, and then you create a radius, and then how fast you want to fly around that radius, as well as the direction. You can also determine direction. Next is follow me, and then waypoints. It allows you to have various points that you're going to, including altitude as well as a particular location, and then you can go on to the next one and so on. I'll be demonstrating all these to you. Home lock allows you to easily come back to your location, and then course lock is a little bit different. It's more of a straight type of direction, but both of these are very helpful. I will be going through all of these using the flight simulator. So let's go ahead and hit the close box here. So that concludes this area, at least for now. This will allow us to return to home, and this icon will allow us to take off. And so we can take off by dragging the little bubble over to the right, and then the Phantom will take off. And the other thing it does is it tells you here the aircraft will go to an altitude of 4 feet and then hover in place. Once the Phantom is up flying, then this icon changes to automatic landing. So you can also use this icon for landing purposes. Well, this ends our lesson 2 instruction. I hope that the detail that I've provided will have been worth the time that you spent in going over this video. Next, we'll be taking a look at lesson 3, where I'll help you with your first flight and provide other flights for further instruction.